Steven is looking for a cord to plug the computer in. We're at 60%. We could probably make it, but
I don't know, man.
We don't want to chance it.
That's a risk, man.
Does your laptop need a new battery? Hey, somebody joined us. 2 people? Can we get 3?
All right. Everybody, let us know who you are. So we know who
Yeah.
we're talking to.
Sign in the comments. Let us know who's joined.
Are these too bright?
I don't know. I think it looks pretty good. I have some glare on my glasses, but that's like inevitable.
Hello, everyone's. Hello. How do you do? How do you do,
Good
Mr. Ryland?
evening.
Good evening, Ryland.
Hey, Dana.
That reminds me. I have something I want to talk to you about later.
Okay.
An idea.
All right.
It's going to be great. And you guys will all find out about that even later. We'll see if I can talk Ryland into
I like
something.
good ideas. Oh, I'm not hard to talk into things.
No, you're not. It's great. Okay. All right. So Dana is one of the 5. Clearly, she's on the list in terms of the 5 that are here.
Celia and Dave are one of the 8 now. I'm assuming they don't have 2 different phones or TVs they're watching it on.
Well, it could be on the iPad. One of them could be Celia. Could be kicked back in the bed, watching on the iPad. Dave could be watching their TV. Who knows? It could be.
There's no way to know.
Could be either way. So
Unless we get
let's
8
see.
different people.
Brent Bates is here. Dana says, which it seemed like it would have been.
Yeah.
Brent saying that, but no.
He's hiding in the shadows.
Oh, maybe on her Facebook it said Brent is joining.
Oh, like someone's watching.
Yeah, that's probably
Yeah.
true. We don't. It doesn't
Yeah, I
tell
see
us
that sometimes. Yeah, we don't see that.
Yeah. So, all right, we are going to talk about a totally different subject today, and it's of such a different. Could you feel the difference in the tone reading? I know you read some of this. So
Yeah, this is different. This is more like a kind of like a history book.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It kind of reads like a Chronicles or Book of Kings.
Well, one of the
or
questions I
something
had,
that.
I know a lot of the early histories that they wrote, they exaggerated a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And I was wondering if this was similar in how the numbers of people that were in places. I mean, they seem small compared to some of the numbers that you see.
Yeah,
the
that's
ancient,
interesting.
There was 1 million people,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we
yeah,
fought
yeah.
3
No.
million, and we killed them.
I kind of think Second Maccabees even opens with a chapter that says some stuff like that. Like
Oh, really?
we're not fluffing up the numbers and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
this is no exaggeration.
No, I think the numbers are probably much closer here.
Yeah. But the
That's
odds
a
seem
great question,
really against the Maccabees in most of these fights.
Yes, they are.
Big time.
They are.
It's like they watched that movie 300.
Okay, so you say that.
Facetiously.
And I want to say that you have it backwards.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because this is that movie in some ways. All right, now
Okay.
what I mean by that is we'll come back to that. Don't let me forget that.
Okay.
Okay, but
All right.
we're gonna come back to the when we talk about why this book is kind of significant. Just out of the way. First and second, I'm going to talk about them like they're one book because they're kind of 2 different versions of the same story. Okay, First and Second Maccabees are not like First and Second Samuel in that you have this continuous story that at the end of the first one it kind of picks up in the second one. And,
Could it be like 1 Samuel and 1 Chronicles?
Yeah, it'd be much more like
Don't they
Second Samuel,
overlap?
Second Samuel, First Chronicles.
Second
Yeah,
Samuel,
yeah,
First
yeah.
Chronicles. Okay.
Or like First Kings and First Kings and First Chronicles or something like that.
Yeah,
But
okay, that's the ones that have
yeah. It's much more like that. Like they First and Second Maccabees. Second Maccabees, everything that's in Second Maccabees could kind of fit in the first, 10 chapters of the first book. Okay, it's it's kind of an expanded. I don't know. Expanded is not really right. It's just a differently styled telling of that story. Okay, so you get some details that are different and some details. I mean, they're not really. I wouldn't say they're contradictory, but they're just kind of expanded. Just kind of an expanded telling of it. And so that's so when we talk about these books, the Maccabees books, that's really what we're talking about. We can kind of talk about them in the same breath because the first 2 books are really very similar. They tell the story of events that happen about 150 years, 170 years before Jesus. Okay, that's kind of where they pick up, and it's this little window of time that captures the revolt of the Jews against an empire that was ruling them then, which was the Seleucid Empire. Okay? And that may sound kind of strange to us because the Seleucids aren't on our radar because we read the Old Testament books, which are concerned with the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians, and then we kind of skip, and all of a sudden the Roman Empire's there. Okay, and because we fast forward through that, we kind of forget that there were some bridges. There's some like historical bridges that had to develop between those things. And the book of Maccabees really provide like a really significant one of those. Okay, now so if we're talking about like empires and we go Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, and then we fast forward to the Romans. Okay, like
in the Bible you get like you get all the way through Daniel, and he's kind of like, as far as like historically. He's one of the last characters, right? You got the prophets. Do some of the prophets fall after Daniel, maybe, or are they mostly in there somewhere?
Yeah,
it's all
they're
during
kind of
exile.
the same. Yes,
we're all talking about like people in exile.
Well, or post-exilic, or they've returned, from
Nehemiah
during the Persian Empire. There's a kind of a repatriation.
Okay. Let some people
where they come back. Right?
Okay. So that happens, and then so that's what you're talking about. Babylon,
that's all the Old Testament stuff,
and Persia, right?
Right,
and then Rome is like Jesus' time, and so you're talking about in between those two things.
Yes, in between those two things. Okay, and if we just think about it, if you think back to your like Western Civ classes, okay, well, like what's a major shift? There's one like major piece, but between the Persians and the Romans, what are we missing there?
Alexander the Great.
Yeah, Alexander the Great, right? He like changes the world.
And we don't hear about it anything in the Bible proper, in the canon, right?
It's not even a thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, yes. Okay, but we'll just leave that alone for now. Okay. Yeah. And when we get to, there's some allusions in the book of Daniel is what I'm. Okay, that's something I'm going to there. In some of the prophetic stuff in the back, the apocalyptic stuff in the back, Okay, when we talk about that space, though, okay, I was about to call him Alexander Campbell. It's still the same class as a couple of weeks ago, guys. No, Alexander the Great comes down from Macedonia, sweeps through, defeats the Persians, and then presses, further east. And he rules all of the ancient Near East, this whole pocket of stuff that we're concerned with. But the crazy thing about his rule is that he only rules for like 14 years, right? And then he's gone. He dies early, dies young, and his empire is more or less handed over.
Did you ever watch the movie with? I can't remember his name. The Alexander movie?
No, I don't think I have.
I didn't watch it either. I was wondering if it was accurate.
I mean, I probably should have done that.
Because I was thinking about reading up, but if I can just watch a movie.
Oh, you know what? You say that. There was a real rumor. There was a not just a rumor. There was a lot of stuff planned where, after the Passion of the Christ, the Mel Gibson movie, there were plans for him to make a Maccabees movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which I really wish that had happened. I think that would be like really useful for a lot of people. Anyway. So the Alexander the Great's like empire is basically broken into pieces and left to his generals. Okay, and one of those
4 or 5 guys, right? We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah. And he and then it coalesces around a couple. Okay, that really retain power through time. And in one of those is the Seleucid Empire. Okay, of course you have the Ptolemies down in Egypt. Okay. That are going to come into play in the Roman story, in their own way. But then you have, and then you have the
Seleucids.
The Seleucids, okay, and then and those are the major ones for our concern right now. Okay, now by this time, like the Roman Republic, not the empire yet. Okay, it's also starting to rise in its own way too, but it's not the major force in the area yet. Okay. In the Seleucid Empire is based out of Syria, out of Antioch. Okay, that's where their home base is. Okay, and what happens is all of these little empires are kind of like pushing each other a little bit. They're all jostling for more and better land and wealth. Okay. And they're trying to raise armies, okay, and they're trying to they're trying to gain resources, financial resources, so that they can raise the kind of armies that they want to really be permanent, long-standing empires. That's the big thing. Okay. And what happens is Judah is, like many, many times in its history, Jerusalem and Judah are they are like the knot on the tug of war rope.
Yeah.
They're just like right in the middle.
They're in the middle of all this stuff.
Yeah, they're right in the middle.
Yeah.
And technically they're under the rule of the Seleucids, okay? But they're mostly leaving them alone until this time period in about 170, okay? And 180 BC.
So that's something that came in like with the Persians, right? They kind of let them go back and let them do what they want. And Alexander came in and he just kind of continued to let them do what they want.
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
And then
pay your tribute.
Yeah.
Okay, but as long as you pay, you're not.
And now we're down the line and things are starting to change.
Okay, so here's what happens. All right, there are the real forces in charge in Judea are the priests, okay, and the temple managers. And what happens is the Seleucids realize that there's this like random province in their kingdom that is sitting on a ton of money.
Yeah.
Okay,
like
and that's really what
the
happens.
Treasure,
The treasury of the temple. And they find out that there's money in Jerusalem, like a lot of money. Yeah. And that's useful to what they want to do in terms of raising their army. Okay. And there's this like whole series of events because I think one of the lessons of this book that you have to realize is that we kind of think about Judah in these stories, and we kind of think of them in terms of like being a single monolithic kind of community, where the truth is that even in the biblical times, like even in like the Old Testament, certainly the New Testament, there were always like these jostling factions for power, and there's times when that kind of breaks through, and we can see it in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. There's the Sadducee-Pharisee debate that's going on, and but there were also people, and there were families, that were kind of had their group of followers. So like there's one group of followers that's the Oniad dynasties, the Onias and his children. There's a Simeon, that's got some power. Okay, there's a guy named Menelaus that has some power. And all these people are like trying to jostle for position to be high priest in their turn or to have control. And the deal is that...
now, how is it supposed to like be running?
That's a great question.
Like from, I know it's the descendants of Aaron, but I don't know how like the power plays went, in Jerusalem, how they were supposed to go.
Well, the Old Testament's just not clear about that.
Yeah, right.
I think the answer is that you probably have some prophetic divination that's going on. Okay, but you also have like it's much clearer because the relationship between the temple priest and the king is very clear. Okay, so really what's happening is that even though the ideal situation is that the temple is checking the king, it's also true that the king is kind of the kings are manipulating who this. Okay, so one of the things that happens when you have the exile and the temple structure is demolished at first is that all that goes away. Yeah. Okay, and what you
now
have,
you're not allowed to have a king.
You're not allowed to have a king, but you are allowed to have the temple, right?
Yeah.
And so the temple kind of runs itself. Okay, so just like you would imagine in like a really internalized community, like people are kind of jostling for influence. It's coming time that so and so is going to die. A lot of times it's handed down to their child. Okay, but if that's not a clear line of succession, then somebody else can maybe make a play to become the high priest, and who has the most followers. And they're not necessarily taking a vote, but you know what I'm saying? Like somebody asserts themselves into that position. So and importantly, a lot of times what happens is the foreign empires or governors or whoever was running, like they exert influence to like say, hey, we think you should be the next priest. Okay. And that's what happens in this story.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. What happens is you have these priests who are making plays with the Seleucids just up the street in Antioch. They're not far away, okay? And they're saying, hey, you know what? I would be a really good high priest. In fact,
Seleucid.
Yeah. In fact, one of them comes. One of the things that happens is that they basically make bids and say, hey, you know, I know you already charge us some tribute, but if you make me the high priest, I can get my hands on a lot of gold out of that temple, and I can get it to you. Mm-hmm. Okay, and they really do. I mean, this is part of the story that the Maccabees are telling, is that there are these bribes.
Yeah.
And then you have these foreign powers that are kind of weighing in on who should be doing. And then there are these blatant attempts to rob the temple too.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there's times where like people don't come through with their bribes that they've promised, so they've been made the high priest, but then they're like, well, I don't really want to pay up, you know. So there's a real tension with all that. Yeah. Okay. And it's all stewing. And this guy, it all comes up to a head during the reign of this guy, Antiochus the Fourth, or Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay, his father.
And this name, Antioch, right? Well,
yeah. Well,
it's
other way around.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but that's the city was named after the family.
Yes,
right?
yes. They're ruling. Yeah, and
that kind of puts it into perspective. Like
Antiochus. Yes. And Antiochus is his father has made a push to gain, like he begins by pushing against the Roman influence. Mm-hmm. Okay, the influence of Rome to the northwest. Yeah.
Okay? And so you said Rome is like in really early stages of the Republic.
They're in the Republic at this point.
So they're not super powerful.
No, but they are. But they have become more militarily influential at this point. Okay,
and it's Rome. Rome's not Seleucid or Ptolemy, right?
No, they're just kind of their own thing.
Related? Yeah. It's not related to Alexander the Great.
Not really. Yeah, okay. They do. They begin to claim that they. This is more important during the Empire time. Okay, but they begin to claim that they are the cultural keepers of the Greek legacy.
Okay.
So you have all this Greek culture, the Greek pantheon, Greek philosophy, and all that stuff, and the Romans kind of claim that they are the successors in all that. And in fact, it's so much so that they come to claim, after our story is done, okay, they come to claim that anywhere that Greek culture had been promoted was rightfully their Roman, mm-hmm. They should have turf. They should have their turf. Yeah. That becomes a big deal later, but it's not really. I don't remember what that doctrine's called, but that's actually late. That's more closer to the Empire, or maybe even the beginning of the imperial days.
Okay.
But the formation of that idea is already there, because everybody's fighting for rule of the post Alexander era. That's what they're jostling for. Okay, and so the Seleucids are trying to go. The Antiochus the Third. Okay, he's fighting up that way, and then he gets stopped. The Romans stop him. Okay, they defeat him, and when they do, they make him sign a treaty that we said earlier.
They limited on the number of battleships he had, and that he wasn't allowed to have elephants.
Yes, right, because there's this military technology, these elephant,
So if you were wondering, if you were wondering what the ancient equivalent of a nuclear weapon is, it's an elephant.
Yeah, and think about Hannibal and Carthage. That whole thing. They're not the only ones doing this, but that's something that they had access to, and so the Romans are like, don't.
That would be scary.
And when they sign, when they sign that treaty, another thing they do is they say, and your heir has to come.
It's a hostage.
Yeah, a hostage. Yeah, and so he goes and moves into a palace. This son, Antiochus the Fourth. His name is Mithridates at that point, okay? Because he's not taken on this royal title yet. Yeah.
And it's the kind of hostage that you keep not to torture and get information from. It's like an easy life.
It's just
if your dad messes up, they're gonna kill you.
Yeah. You can come live in our palace, but if your dad, if we see an elephant anywhere out there, we're coming for you.
If we see any elephants at all.
Yeah. Okay, so Antiochus then Antiochus is living in that. Eventually, his father dies, okay, or is betrayed in connection with some stuff in Judea, okay. He's killed. Antiochus then is able to take. He's able to take to the throne, right? Actually, what happens is his brother.
He gets released as a hostage because his uncle or someone else takes the throne.
Yes.
So he's no longer in line.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So it's actually I think his older son. I think it's his older son. So his
older brother.
Mithridates' older brother takes the throne, which means that now his children are in the line of succession, and this guy who's like a cousin is not in the line of throne. So they release him. Okay, and then what happens is he gets killed in this whole process of like trying to get money from the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, he ends up getting killed, and remember he has like a young child. Okay, well, Mithridates says, "I am going to be co-regent with that child." Because he's not ready to take the throne yet.
Enough.
He's not ready to take. So I'm going to be his co-king, and then he kills him. Kills his child. I mean, it's terrible. Terrible person. Terrible. Yes,
his nephew.
Foreshadowing some stuff.
His nephew.
Yeah, he kills his nephew. And then he's the king. He's the Seleucid emperor. All right. So at this point, what happens is he knows that he can't really push to the north with Rome. Because he just doesn't have the clout. He's not prepared. He doesn't have his elephants, okay, and he doesn't have the money, okay, and so he can't do that yet. And so he goes down in 170 BC. He's taken the throne. He goes down in 170 BC, and he is successful in attacking the Ptolemies in Egypt. Okay,
is that like just all these people know how to do is like get an army and attack someone?
Yes.
Like they can't just fortify their borders and kind of like grow their strength.
All right, let's talk about that a little bit. All right, we're going to talk about that in just a second. Okay, because he is going to quickly run out. Okay, so he comes back. And he does some stuff in Syria.
He wins a couple of battles against Ptolemy, right?
Yes. But stopped. 170 is like the real. Yeah, he kind of like goes down in. He goes far in, takes a lot of territory, and he comes back.
This part, right?
Yeah. Well, no, we're about to get to that. We're about to.
Okay.
So this is like all this stuff. So here's the next part. Okay, a couple of years later, he tries to make a campaign down there again in 168. Okay, he's expanded as far as he can in the other places. He can't go north anymore. He can't go really east anymore either. And so he thinks he can come down and get some more resources from Egypt so that he can build his army up and then go further into Persia. He really wants to go to the eastern way. Okay, but in order to do that, he needs the resources from Egypt. Okay, so he goes down there. And you know what he finds when he's on his way? Oh, what's this Roman doing in meeting me in the middle of the desert? All right, before he can actually get into like Alexandria and all this stuff. All right, and he actually encounters a Roman ambassador because unbeknownst to him, the Romans and the Ptolemies have made a treaty. Okay, and so the Romans are there to say, we can't have you in. We can't have you just coming down here and taking stuff.
Okay.
And he says, and the Romans basically are saying, look, the Senate, we want to make a treaty with you. We have the authority to do that. And Antiochus says, okay, well, I need to go talk to my counselors. Like, let me think about it. I'm going to I'm going to call a council with my people, and I'll come back and I'll let you know. But probably, he's like, I don't want to sign off of this. Like on the okay, the Roman ambassador comes over to him and takes a I can't remember if it's a finger or a stick. Does it say on there? Yeah.
He just says you drew a line.
Okay, so I think he takes a stick or something, and he literally draws a line in the sand,
like a
circle around Antiochus, and he says, you're going to tell me whether you agree to the treaty before you leave that circle. It's like a boss power move on the account of Rome, right? And now the threat is not, okay, I knew I couldn't press them further into around the northwest, around going through Turkey and Greece and all that kind of stuff. He knew he doesn't have the power of that, but he doesn't want he doesn't. What Antiochus doesn't want is Roman ships pulling up to Syria, right? Like he doesn't want them coming through, whittling him down from the north. I mean, that'd be really bad. And so he's pretty much a failed king at this point. All right, like his empire is going to come. And so he also apparently around the same time, like he's dejected because he's lost this like major push and something that was key to his plans. Okay, and so now he has essentially two fronts. Okay, so he has three fronts that he was dealing with: the northwest Rome, Turkey, that Rome through Turkey, the southern southwest around the others, going around the Mediterranean down to Egypt. Okay, and then the Persian side in the east. Okay, and now his plan was to go get those resources and then be able to attack in the east. He can't do that anymore. And he's really frustrated about it. But about that same time, he gets word that sounds like there's a revolt back home in Jerusalem. All right, and so in 168, 167, he comes back to Jerusalem. And now we've really set up our story. Okay, this is really a setup for everything that we've done is really setting up.
Yeah, the beginning of Maccabees. Yeah, so you get a little bit of this in the first chapter.
Yeah, that's right. The first chapter kind of lays out a little bit about how all this stuff happens. And here's, you were asking me about this earlier. When he comes back, and everybody needs to know this, when Antiochus comes back to Jerusalem. For 3 years, the Jews in Jerusalem are going to suffer through like one of the historically worst persecutions that they're ever going to face. Okay, essentially up until the World War II pogroms.
Wow.
Okay, it is
worse than like Nero and all the stuff after.
Yeah, I think it's genocidal.
That's mostly Christian though.
Yeah,
right? That's not so much the Jews.
I mean, the Jews suffer persecution during Rome too, but it's different. And I think it really comes to the ethnic cleansing, almost kind of genocidal kind of thing. Okay.
That's bad.
And because what happens is there's going to be a. First of all, we'll just read some of this now, okay? Because some of it is just like when he comes back, his initial impulse is to, essentially quash whatever rebellion is there, okay? And that's that means he just kind of comes in and slaughters a bunch of people, okay? That's kind of the first step, is like the invasion of Jerusalem, okay? It says, when Antiochus saw that his kingdom was established... Oh, wait, let's go a little bit further. Here we go. After subduing Egypt, Antiochus returned in the 143rd year. He went up against Israel and came to Jerusalem with a strong force. He arrogantly entered the sanctuary and took the gold... Oh, wait. Hold on a second. Am I still not doing it right?
Well, this tells it a little bit different than what we just told it. This says Antiochus goes to Egypt and he wins some battles. He captured and fortified cities, and then he just comes back.
Yeah. Here it is. This is really what I'm talking about. Okay, this is a little bit further. This is in verse 20 and 29 following of the first chapter. Okay. 2 years later, the king sent to the cities of Judah a chief collector of tribute, and he came to Jerusalem with a large force. Deceitfully spoke peaceful words to him, and they believed it. But he suddenly fell upon the city and dealt it a severe blow, and destroyed many people of Israel. He plundered the city and burned it with fire, and tore down its houses and its surrounding walls. They took captive the women and children, seized the livestock, and they fortified the city of David with a great strong wall and strong towers, and it became their citadel. They stationed there a sinful people who were renegades. These strengthened their position. They stored up arms and food, and collecting the spoils of Jerusalem, they stored them there and became a great menace. Okay, so that's kind of this story about him coming back in and all of this, just this violence that comes when they first show up at the door, right? And that's part of the deal, is that there's this like authoritarian rule that's set up from the very beginning, okay? And what happens after that is that he imposes on them. And this is the thing that we don't know why, because this is like not something that happened almost anywhere else in the ancient world at this time. But basically, Antiochus forces the Jews to adopt a paganism. Okay? and he forces them to abandon the law so that it becomes a capital crime to have a copy of the Torah or to be caught reading the Torah.
It sounds a little bit like the stuff that was going on when Daniel was in Babylon, right?
Yeah, that's not by accident. There's a lot of people that think that Daniel is really crafted as kind of a reflection on the Antiochus story, this story. Okay, that the historical thing may go the other way. All right, that Daniel's just written later, and I think there's really good evidence for that, at least in part. That you have these stories of Daniel from Babylon, okay, that are kind of retold and reshaped to kind of be a reflection on what it means to live under an evil king, you know.
Yeah.
And what happens is these serious atrocities where there's several stories where, all right, let's just read this a little bit, right? The books of the law that they found, they tore to pieces and burned with fire. Anyone found possessing the book of the covenant, or anyone who adhered to the law, was condemned to death by decree of the king. They kept using violence against Israel, against those who were found month after month in the town. On the 25th day of the month, they offered a sacrifice on the altar that was on top of the altar of the burnt offering. According to the decree, they put to death the women who had their children circumcised, and their families and those who circumcised them. And they hung the infants from their mothers' necks. I mean, that's really brutal, right?
Yeah.
And it says, but many in Israel stood firm and were resolved in their hearts not to eat unclean food. They chose to die rather than to be defiled by the food or to profane the holy covenant, and they did die. Second Maccabees tells a story about like a priest who is forced to eat pork. Okay, of course it's prohibited, and he basically refuses to do it, and they put him on some kind of torture apparatus, and they start breaking all his bones, you know, and he kind of has this martyrdom moment where he proclaims that he's still faithful even in the midst of all that happening, you know. I mean, it's really bad. It's really bad. And I'll tell you what, there was in second Maccabees chapter 6, there's this like set of stories. I think I think we're in good time to read some of this.
Because again, Second Maccabees is a retelling, so we can get some of the same stuff.
Yeah. Pretty much the same thing.
A little big expansion of it.
Actually, chapter 7. Second Maccabees chapter 7. It also happened there were 7 brothers and their mothers happened that 7 brothers and their mother were arrested and were being compelled by the king under torture with whips and thongs to partake of unlawful swine's flesh. Okay. And of course, these are like symbolic acts, right? Like, we know that you're prohibited by the law from taking this. We're going to make you do it as a sign that you're not following the law anymore. Okay. And they're refusing to do that. One of them, acting as their spokesman, said, "What do you intend to ask and learn from us? For we are ready to die rather than transgress the laws of our ancestors." The king fell into a rage and gave orders to have pans and cauldrons heated. These were heated immediately, and he commanded that the tongue of their spokesman be cut out, and that they scalp him and cut off his hands and feet, while the rest of the brothers and the mother looked on. When he was utterly helpless, the king ordered him to take him to the fire, still breathing, and to fry him in a pan. The smoke from the pan spread widely, but the brothers and their mother encouraged one another to die nobly, saying, "The Lord is watching over us, and in truth has compassion on us," as Moses declared in his song that bore witness against the people in their faces, when he said, "And he will have compassion on his servants." After the first brother had died in this way, they brought forward the second for their sport. And they tore off the skin of his head with the hair, and they asked him, "Will you eat rather than have your body punished limb by limb?" And he replied in the language of his ancestors and said to them, "No." And therefore he in turn underwent tortures as the first brother had done. And when he was at his last breath, he said, "You accursed wretch, you dismiss us from this present life, but the King of the universe will raise us up to an everlasting renewal of life, because we have died for his laws." After him, the third was the victim of their sport. When it was demanded, he quickly put out his tongue and courageously stretched forth his hands and said nobly, "I got these from heaven, and because of his laws I disdain them, and from him I hope to get them back again." As a result, the king himself and those who were with him were astonished at the young man's spirit, for he regarded his sufferings as nothing. After he too had died, they maltreated and tortured the fourth in the same way. When he was near death, he said, "One cannot but choose to die at the hands of mortals, and to cherish the hope God gives of being raised again by him. But for you there will be no resurrection of the life." And next they brought forward the fifth and maltreated him. But he looked at the king and said, "Because you have authority among mortals, though you are also immortal, do what you please. But do not think that God has forsaken our people. Keep on and see how his mighty power will torture you and your descendants. After him, they brought forward the sixth. And when he was about to die, he said, do not deceive yourself in vain, for we are suffering these things on our own account because of our sins against God. Therefore, astounding things have happened. But do not think that you will go unpunished for having tried to fight against God. All right, and then it says, the mother was especially admirable and worthy of honorable memory. Although she saw her 7 sons perish within a single day, she bore it with good courage because of her hope in the Lord. She encouraged each of them in the language of their ancestors. Filled with a noble spirit, she reinforced her woman's reasoning with a man's courage and said, I love that line, and said to them, I do not know how you came into being in my womb. It was not I who gave you life and breath, nor I who set in order the elements within each of you. Therefore, the creator of the world, who shaped the beginning of humankind and devised the origin of all things, will in his mercy give life and breath back to you again, since you now forget yourselves for the sake of his laws. So she's saying to her, she's basically blessing her children, her dying martyrs. Antiochus felt that he was being treated with contempt. He is! Right. And he was suspicious of her reproachful tone. The youngest brother being still alive, Antiochus not only appealed to him in words, but promised with oaths that he would make him rich and enviable if he would turn from the ways of his ancestors. He would take him for his friend and entrust him with public affairs. Since the young man would not listen to him at all, the king called the mother to him and urged her to advise the youth to save himself. After much urging on his part, she undertook to persuade her son. But leaning close to him, she spoke in their native tongue as follows, deriding the cruel tyrant. My son, have pity on me. I carried you 9 months in my womb and nursed you for 3 years and have reared you and brought you up to this point in your life and have taken care of you. I beg you, my child, to look at the heaven and the earth and see everything that is in them and recognize that God did not make them out of things that existed, and in the same way the human race came into being. Do not fear this butcher, but prove worthy of your brothers. Accept death, so that in God's mercy I may get you back again along with your brothers. I mean, it's a crazy speech from the mother, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the mother who enjoins her son for be faithful to God, even though it is going to cause your death, And while she was still speaking, the young man said, what are you waiting for? I will not obey the king's command, but I obey the command of the law that was given to our ancestors through Moses. But you who have contrived all sorts of evil against the Hebrews will certainly not escape the hands of God, for we are suffering because of our own sins. And if our living Lord is angry for a little while to rebuke and discipline us, he will again be reconciled with his own servants. But you, unholy wretch, you most defiled of all mortals, do not be elated in vain and puffed up by uncertain hopes when you raise your hand against the children of heaven. You have not yet escaped the judgment of the Almighty, all-seeing God. For our brothers, after enduring a brief suffering, have drunk of ever-flowing life under God's covenant, but you, by the judgment of God, will receive just punishment for your arrogance. I, like my brothers, give up body and life for the laws of our ancestors, appealing to God to show mercy soon to our nation, and by trials and plagues to make you confess that he alone is God, and through me and my brothers to bring to an end the wrath of the Almighty that has justly fallen on our whole nation. The king fell into a rage and handled him worse than the others, being exasperated at his scorn. And so he died in his integrity, putting his whole trust in the Lord. Last of all, the mother died after her sons. Okay, so this is and it says, let this be enough then about the eating of sacrifices and the extreme tortures.
Extreme tortures.
Ready to move on to the victorious kind of stuff, right? Yes, please. But isn't it, I'll tell you, I read that to say, you can kind of see the martyr culture that's at work here. Yeah. Right? And it does have the spirit of Daniel, okay? It has the spirit of Daniel going to the lion's den, or the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego story where they're we're not going to bow down to you.
This is a more adult version, though. In Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, they're okay in the end, and they get elevated. And I think maybe whoever was writing this realized that a lot of these people were just going to die.
That's exactly right.
And they need to read some stories about people who are just going to die.
Yeah, sometimes you just die. Yeah, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they say that, right? They say, even we believe that God can save us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to obey,
were ready
right?
to do this, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, you're right. This is like the counterpart. There's stories too where people don't all make it, right? Yeah. Okay, but that's not the whole story that the Maccabees tell. In fact, a big important part of that story is that that in the moment where they've taken over the temple, okay, they set up they put another altar, like a pagan altar, on top of the other altar, the altar, the Jewish altar that's been there for a long time.
Yeah. Well, they tore most of it down. Did they tear a bunch of it down, or they defiled it, or
They
something?
defile it. Well, this is what they do. They put this other temple on it, and they begin like slaughtering swine, like sacrificing swine, pigs. Okay, and at one point they're trying to. Okay, so part of their whole thing here is it's not just the stuff that they're telling the Jews they can't do, but they're trying to push the Jews into doing certain other things too. So they build a gymnasium, okay, because they want them to participate in this stuff. We think maybe because it'll lead to them being ready to fight in his army, that kind of stuff.
Gymnasium, is that like a coliseum, like where they would?
Well,
fights,
like a wrestling gymnasium where they're going to be physically training.
Okay, like a barracks or maybe.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, that's kind of like a Greek culture feature. Like this is just something that happens in Greek cities. Yeah. And what they try to do here is it's not just that they want to abolish the cult of Yahweh. Okay, they want to transform it into being part of this like polytheistic culture. Okay, and so they take one of the priests and they want him to sacrifice a pig on the altar to Zeus or something, and that's kind of their way of like kind of forcing him to cross this threshold into being a pagan, essentially. Okay. Well, there's another old priest that's there. His name's Mattathias. And Mattathias sees this going down. You read this part, right?
Yeah.
So,
he is not very happy, and he runs up does he have a sword? And he just like kills the guy. So the first like they ask one guy to do it, and he won't do it. Maybe I can't remember exactly.
Yeah. Say what now?
Did they ask someone to do it, and he wouldn't do it? And maybe they killed him, and they asked another guy to do it, and he's done
Yeah,
it
that's right. There's this threat. Yeah, and then what happens is Mattathias sees that he's about to do it, and what Mattathias runs out with his own sword, and he kills the priest. That's
then
like
he kills the official,
and then he kills everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
He kills everybody that's there, participating in this whole thing, or the ones that are on the Seleucid side.
Yeah,
and then he runs off into the hills.
Yeah.
Okay, and he yells out. He yells out before he goes. He says, "Everybody that's with me for like a true Judaism, or basically, or something like that, and against this tyrant king, come with me." Yeah. And so, like, some number of people go out with him, and basically, what happens is he begins fighting a guerrilla war.
Yeah.
Okay, and he starts notching kind of victory after victory. Okay. And he has some significant ones, and then he gets old and he dies, and one of his sons takes over. Okay, and his son's name is Judas, and they call him Judas Maccabeus. Okay, and it's the best biblical nickname ever. You remember what this? You know what this stands for? Maccabees?
I do not.
Man, this is great. It's Hebrew for the hammer.
Oh. That's a movie, I think, like the Hebrew Hammer. I think that's a movie on Netflix. Or
I mean, Judas the Hammer.
Yeah,
okay?
That's a great name.
It's a great name, right?
So that's not his family name. Is that his nickname that they give him?
No, that's the Maccabeus is his like nickname. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and because he's just a descendant. He's the son of. He would have been Judas ben Mattathias.
Okay.
So here,
he's like his middle son too. So he's got like an older son,
Simeon,
that's like ruling.
It's starting to, well, that's what's going to happen. Okay, so what's going to happen is the beginning of a dynasty here.
Yeah.
Okay. And Judas is the first real general of that group. Okay, he's really in charge.
He's
Mattathias says Simeon's going to be in charge,
and Simeon's
but really Judas is the one in charge. Judas is the one.
Well, that's what it reads like. Yeah, once you start reading it.
And Judas really throws down. I mean, and he pushes the Seleucids out. They are able to win some battles out in the field, and then fight their way
against enormous odds.
Yes,
every time.
Yep, and they fight their way in. Eventually, they're able to retake Jerusalem, and then they retake the temple, and they re-purify the temple, and they celebrate it for 8 days. Okay, they relight the lamp in the temple, and what do we call that festival today?
Hanukkah.
That's right. This is the story of Hanukkah. This is the story of Hanukkah.
So 8 days, but there's 12 days of Hanukkah. right?
No, there's 12 days of Christmas.
There's 12 days of Christmas and 8 days of Hanukkah?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh, that's... Okay, yeah. I knew
yeah,
that. No. I don't know why I thought there was the same number of days.
Is that different? And there's that's not told in here, but there's kind of this like story of like a miracle of the lamp, the fuel that they have for the lamp is
Like it doesn't go out,
yeah. But that's not told in the stories here. But this is the story of that victory that commemorates them like reclaiming the temple. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it sticks, surprisingly, for a while. You kind of have this dynasty, this Jewish dynasty, the Hasmonean dynasty, that's kind of more or less rule, okay? And they've kind of been able to fuse they were priests, mm-hmm. right? They were from the priestly line, right? So they're Levites, right? So that for a while you have this fusing of the throne and
like
the
priest
temple.
King.
Priest kings. And
which is what the Messiah is supposed to be, right?
Right. Man, this is a big challenge. This is a big problem. All right, so let's back up a little bit. So that's the story. It's the story about this group of people that
Are we to the part yet where you're going to talk about the 300? Okay, just reminding me.
Because what happens is that this story, we understand when we read the New Testament that one of the backdrops of that is there's this kind of like simmering sense of rebellion against Rome. Mm-hmm. Okay? And all those people, like you said, well, that sounds like they watched the story of the 300 mm-hmm. or something like that. Okay. When I said they are the story, what I mean by that is every Jewish boy growing up in this world, in Galilee, okay, in Judea, really in Galilee, okay, they've heard these stories growing up like their whole lives, and they are the heroes. Like the
Maccabees.
The Maccabees are the heroes, okay? And so when
they want to be the hammer.
They want to be the who wouldn't want to be the hammer.
They dress up as Judas Maccabeus for Halloween.
And that's why you have these kind of rebel leaders, okay? And we kind of think of them because the person that we associate most with the Messiah is David. Right, if we kind of like
before,
right,
yeah.
There's all these reflections of him being a son of David and all this kind of stuff, right? Well, and that's good, okay. But the people in Jesus's culture had another model of what messiahship kind of looked like, okay, and it was the Maccabees, mm-hmm. right? And that's why you have these like rising claim to be messiahs, over and over again. Both before and then after Jesus, like claim, like they lead these rebellions, and what they do is they gather up a band of rebels and they go to the hills mm-hmm. and they start ambushing Romans, mm-hmm. and that's the pattern, right? And that's what they're afraid. That's what the Romans are afraid Jesus is going to do. They're afraid that he's going to go out to the wilderness, like where John the Baptist is. Okay, like that's what they're afraid. Like they're afraid that John the Baptist is going to be that's why he's arrested, right? Like, man, you guys are trying to.
You're out in the wilderness.
You're
we
out
know
the
where
wilderness.
the story goes.
Yeah, we've seen that movie. We've seen that movie, right? And and that's kind of a backdrop to all this stuff, right? And so, for Jesus to come, and instead of there at the temple, instead of slaying people and asserting that he's the rightful Messiah, he goes and he initiates this conflict, and then he allows himself to be killed by the Romans. Yeah, it's the opposite of the Maccabean story.
Yeah, he's cleansing the temple, but not from the Gentiles.
That's we actually calls that story, right? There's a couple of temple cleansing stories. Well, that's a motif that's present already. Yeah. That the temple is something that needs to be cleaned if people have defiled it by idolatry or by like a whatever call it. So there's a lot of shades of this story that are present in the New Testament. Like when we read the New Testament, you really kind of need to know like there's this kind of backdrop of it. And also too, like we said, like we didn't really emphasize this when we actually got into the story, but there are these like factions. So there are people that are supporting Antiochus saying, hey, my Jewish brothers, if we just become a little bit more Gentile-ish, like you just go to the gymnasium, like it's
there's
okay.
There's no law against going to the gymnasium.
Let's just do that. Yeah, right. Yeah, there's this, and this is the process of Hellenization. Okay, and it turns really violent in this moment. But by the time we get to the New Testament, that's all there, and there is this level of Hellenization, but there's also this like deep tradition of resisting all that Hellenization, right? So it's not just in the Jesus stories, but it's also in the stories in Acts, right? There, there's that tension between the Hellenized Jews and the Hebraic speaking Jews. Well, that's this. There's conflict between those people because of stories like the Maccabees, right? And also think too about the pattern, like where do we go with the gospel? Where's like one of those first like landing points after we leave Jerusalem? Well, it's Antioch. And it's a big deal. Okay, like you can see, like that's not just a random occurrence. When there's a church established in Syria, I don't know if we really think about that. Like the church in Antioch, where they're first called Christians, right? Paul and Barnabas are sent out as missionaries. That was a Syrian church, and that has symbolism. That's symbolic. That is a symbolic import. Okay, that like there is this empire that had levied all these atrocities. Okay, so if you think about like the story of Acts, like where do we go? Well, we go to Antioch, we go to Macedonia, Alexandria, right? We go to Athens, and we go to Rome. Okay, we're kind of like moving through some of these like imperial homes of places that have been significant. And it's very significant. Like Antioch was the fallen Rome right next door. Okay, that's there's just right north of Galilee. I mean, it's right there. It's the neighbor of Galilee, right? And
is it the closest big city besides like Jerusalem, or?
That's a good question. I have to look at that. There's actually the New Testament a lot of times doesn't really care about how big cities are. Like there's a big city right beside Nazareth that we don't hear anything about, but it's like a big Hellenized city. Sephora, and we never hear anything about it. But it's very contemporary with Jesus' time, But anyway, all that to say that this it is in along that route. It certainly is one of the it's a major space, and historically had been one of those powers that had like threatened and oppressed and had its way with Israel, so that the Jewish Messiah is now being celebrated in the capital in Antioch. Like that's a really big deal. Okay, and we probably don't, as non-Jewish, non-first, we're so distant from that. It's just like for us, it's just like something we have to memorize about the chart of Paul's
it's
journey.
Just another point in his journey.
No. It is a significant point, partly because of like the historical relationship between these two places. And this was,
so was it fair to say that it was like the capital city of the Seleucian Empire?
That's right. Antiochus's throne is in.
Okay.
Is actually,
but that's not a thing by the time Jesus.
Yeah, I should say that like by the time So what happens is there's this kind of like they're essentially going to be assimilated into the Roman Empire. Okay, and they're going to make treaty after treaty. They're going to end up paying tribute, and eventually they're going to be these like annexed puppet kings. They're going to be annexed by the Romans, and Antiochus himself, he finally decides to make his push into the Persian side. Said this thing lasts about 3 years, and so he's making his push that way.
So he gets money from the temple. That helps him. Does that help him?
Yeah. I mean, he's just super nasty. We really don't know why he's so harsh with the Jews. Like nobody really knows that. Whether he was perceiving that they were revolting, whether he was persisting that they're being stubborn against this Hellenization stuff. We really, really don't know why. Because the Seleucids, the Ptolemy, the kind of the successors of the Greeks, they really weren't into like this cultural oppression in the same way. They were kind of shut up, pay your money, we'll go home. But we really don't know why. But he committed like vast atrocities against the Jews. And I think that's pretty historically valid. Even if it's hyperbolic, in some of the ways it's told. that something went wrong. Something went crazy in that relationship between Antiochus Epiphanes and the Jews that led to him asserting his authoritarian rule in these like really, really, really atrocious ways. You know,
and all that's before Judas like the revolts, right? So.
Well, kind of what happened. Okay, so no, yeah, that's right before it. And then while he's gone, he's actually personally not there when they take the temple back. Okay, and the two books actually tell this story a little bit differently, but one of them is that he just kind of dies randomly, you know. But one of the stories in the Maccabees books tells it like he hears that they've cleansed the temple. And he gets really depressed about it and starts like really. I mean, it kind of tells the story about him like basically just getting really sad and feeling like a failure, and then he just dies. He just dies. Yeah,
it's a great way to have like a villain.
He's just discouraged so much that he goes. He's like in his military tent on the way back from these journeys, and he just dies. Yeah.
Because he's lame.
He just gives up with life.
Yeah. So what I guess what I was getting at there was that he wasn't doing this because of the revolt. It was the other way around. They were getting oppressed, and their temple was defiled, and they revolted.
Yes. That's correct.
We don't want to get them the other.
Well, there is possibility that they had some kind of rebellion against like not taking the money or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I mean that's very possible.
Because he had already even before this he had taken some stuff from the temple.
Yes, he's attempting to take more. Yeah,
so one time he took some stuff, and that may have led to like a revolt.
Yeah, the way these books are kind of structured are like these kind of cyclical attacks on the temple, and then we're kind of backing them off. And, various ways that God delivers the people, and like one of them, an angel comes and stops people from taking stuff. And, but that's kind of the cycle here. But basically, Antiochus flames out. Okay, and his descendants eventually just get tired of fighting the Jews and just leave them alone. Yeah. Okay.
That seems like
they're all holed up there. We're not going to get anything else out of it. Just leave them alone.
They don't have any money left in there.
Right. Yeah. We're not. I mean, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Until eventually, they have to kind of Rome basically annexes them along with them too. And that's kind of and the reason Rome, I should say this too, the reason Rome feels like it's okay to do that is because they're in the tradition of Hellenized spaces that have been under the influence of the Greeks in the sense of.
In a lot of cases, doesn't Rome not really care if you have your own culture? Like right. Even when you join their army, right? You can keep your own. Yeah. You can ride an ostrich or a zebra or whatever and go into battle like that if you want to, right? I mean.
Yeah, I mean they don't demand
whatever you do.
I mean, and really the solutions were like that too. Like it was really strange. This 3-year period where Antiochus is just. The book of Daniel, I think, depicts it as basically being like demonic. Yeah. And it may very well be, but it's just it is this period that this king just eventually tries to, really is trying to cleanse them of all their distinctive Jewishness, and fortunately he dies before he's, the people stand up to him and he's not successful. And they very much attribute that to being the work of God. That's kind of the point of the story. So there you go.
Really cool story. It sets up the New Testament. Story.
It really is kind of a backdrop that's important.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And not just like the historical, like these are how the players came to be, but it's the perspectives of what's going on.
Well, you always hear that like people around Jesus thought the Messiah was supposed to be this like, warrior priest that was going to cleanse the temple and kill all the Romans, but now a little bit more why.
We need another hammer.
We
need another hammer, and that's really what they're thinking. Okay, so next week we're gonna do something a little bit different. Okay, we're gonna do like some proverbial, like proverb stuff, some like wisdom literature.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
it's just random, or is there?
I think we're gonna do either wisdom or Sirach. I haven't decided which one. We're gonna do one of those two.
All right. Okay. Sirach is only 51 chapters. So
we're not going to do the whole thing.
Start reading. No. And there's one called Wisdom.
Yep. It's right
About
before it. It should be
prayer
right before.
of Azariah and the Song of the Three Jews. It's only one chapter.
Well, you already know who Azariah is. All right.
All right.
I'll talk to y'all later. Y'all have a great week. Thanks so much for
Thank you,
joining
everyone.
us, and we'll catch up next week. We're just going to do another week or two, and then we'll be on to something else.
something else.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Peace, guys. Bye.